Alison's our next speaker. Very different tack because she's a chemical engineer who was born and bred in Darwin. She's definitely now in WA and living in Perth, doing a PhD at UWA. But her background is a professional career in groups including power and water corporations, wastewater treatment team, and as an engineer in INPEX, UWA, GHD, and BHP, and more recently in the seaweed industry. So you'll hear about it shortly, but Alison's PhD is looking at developing extraction techniques for seaweed-derived products, and she's founded the company North Australian SeaCulture to use this knowledge to develop a sustainable seaweed production hub. So looking forward to hearing this, Alison, and welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. And yeah, good preface that this is going to be a very different presentation than Justin and Angie's. So hopefully I don't make anyone fall asleep. So yeah, North Australian SeaCulture, which is the company I founded last year, looking to kind of bring together all of that background that Rachel was talking about. And for a little bit of an introduction, as mentioned, I'm very much a Northern Territory girl, even though I've been forced to come to the world of Western Australia, and that kind of also drives part of the North Australian SeaCulture intent long term. So educational opportunities in North Australia across, Kimberley, NT, Queensland are few and far between. And unfortunately for me, but I guess maybe fortunately for WA, I had to move down here to complete my studies in chemical engineering, and that did actually open a bunch of doors in terms of learning opportunities with companies, as mentioned, like GHD, which was my early career. That kind of transitioned into this weird and wonderful world of seaweed, not a very normal transition point. A lot of people ask me if I'm a marine biologist, and I very comfortably tell them to talk to Margie, who I think is on the call from Drift, if they have any questions about that. But because of, I guess, my own deficits or gaps in the marine space, I'm very reliant on the partnerships you can see in front of you. So the company itself, which I'll go into shortly, is built around these partnerships, both nationally and internationally, and also with that hyper focus in North Australia to help develop not only these seaweed hubs, but also the training and skill sets required to deliver seaweed aquaculture across North Australia. So why did, I guess, seaweed capture my attention? So I'm sure a lot of you have seen a few of these different trends. This is a very basic one. I like to do basic diagrams for the layman's out there, but it's very clear that in the next sort of decade in particular, there's going to be a significant increase in supply and demand issues. So the demand for red seaweeds in particular is increasing by almost double, particularly led by your agars, carrageenans, and alginates, so your hydrocolloids. And from what's currently being published, and I'll touch on this in a second as well, there's really not much of a response in terms of the supply side of things. There are limitations in the existing industry, which are making it difficult for us to meet this demand long term. So this is sort of one of the first things that sparked up in terms of why I thought seaweed aquaculture could work in North Australia due to those translatable pieces of knowledge across from Indonesia and other North Australian sort of areas. So what are the key challenges? So again, I'm sure if you ask anyone in the seaweed industry, they'll give you a different list, but these were the three that really started popping up, in particular when I visited Indonesia last year to see how these operators are currently doing things. So low and inconsistent quality, and this isn't necessarily because of the farmers themselves or anything they've particularly done, but there are issues in terms of things such as co-locating different species, which can sometimes make it inconsistent for feedstocks into your processing systems. And then you have issues in terms of seasonality, so wet season versus dry season, which is, I guess, an unusual term for anyone who's not from the north. And then you also have issues in terms of some of the intergenerational, I guess, problems regarding like ice and things like that in terms of the species themselves. So how this seaweed is actually able to grow long term, and how, because this has been going on for decades, they're going to deal with that. So access to supply, they're all spread out in the middle of nowhere, like I said, all across Asia, and this would also be an issue translatable to North Australia, hence the model that I'll be presenting. And then the fun one, which I'm sure everyone in the aquaculture industry understands, which is an aging workforce. For some reason, no one of my age and younger want to work in the ocean. And I think up north that's to do with the crocodiles and jellyfish. So how is North Australian SeaCulture tackling this? So we're looking at establishing high quality feedstock, lower energy intensity, adaptable processing, and also creating quality and cost effective products through our unique biorefining process. So to do that, you have to understand the feedstocks themselves. So I'll really rush over this quickly, but feel free to ask questions. There's sort of 3 subcategories. You've got your browns, your greens, and your reds. Typically your browns, a lot of people are looking at your bull kelps and your Clonia radiatas in terms of soil rehabilitation products, and that's in particular in relation to their growth rates and the abundance that you can get for translation onto land. Then you look at your greens, and a lot of people are looking at that in terms of your foods, but also your water quality and processing side of things. So some investigations in terms of wastewater treatment and alike, all those little green grapes that you can put on oysters, Culurpa. And then you've got your reds, which I know I've got a few red seaweed friends on the call, like Chris, who are looking at the fun asparagopsis, so the cattle feed side of things to reduce methane emissions. And the supply and demand graph I had up earlier is in particular in relation to this sort of red space, which is where we fit in. So what have we been doing? NASC's been looking at site selection. So like I said, because we're focusing North Australia, it's really important to identify appropriate locations for these regional hubs. So today we've looked at Broome, Nhulunbuy and Darwin, likely going to go over to Kununurra at some point. And the intent is to identify native species, which might not necessarily be the weird and wonderful known species that can have the same properties for extraction and applied for the same sort of gel agents and fertilized products, which again, I'll touch on shortly. So these are some photos, real life in each of those regions. In the Broome scenario, we'll be looking at soil rehabilitation, both for farming and things like Pilbara, which they're facing some issues with topsoil. Again, with my old mining hat on, I know that's a huge issue in the Pilbara. And also things like aquaculture feed for people like Tassal, like my other 2 colleagues mentioned earlier. Then you've got the fun Nhulunbuy scenario, which again, I could talk about for hours and hours, but they are also facing a mine site rehabilitation and closure issue, but also economic development issue in that area. I know it's not Western Australia. We're kind of creating a nice curve across WA, which includes edible seaweeds, possibly for future revenue generation, those gels, and like I said, soil rehabilitation. So processing considerations, I'm thinking conscious of time, I'm just going to flick this one up here. If you're nerding out with the chemical engineering side, please reach out, but these are the different types of processing extraction techniques that are used globally, and the main considerations are whether or not you're going to process it wet or dried, what is the feedstock type, is it a red, is it a green, is it a brown, and what's your ultimate objective you're going to try and get out of it. With that all in mind, the most common type of extraction technique is what's known as pressurized liquid extraction. Some you guys might have also heard of as enzyme assisted, so that's the sort of process that Ulu uses, and I believe SeaStock uses a pressurized liquid extraction, but hopefully he doesn't correct me if I'm wrong for that. But all of these sorts of processes are typically quite difficult to adopt in regional communities or regional areas because they often require quite heavy process infrastructure. So what our model looks at is using the raw materials that we've identified in these regions, how can we extract multiple products that can both be used locally, but also nationally and globally, with the soil health product being the lead piece. So how can that be used regionally so that you can improve your water holding capacity and alike, and I'll touch on that. So water extraction is very simple. Boil some water on your stovetop and see what comes out, but it's the separation part that's going to be hard. So this is how we're approaching extraction in these regional areas where you'll have lower energy intensity and also lower availability of different feedstocks, chemical additives and alike. So it's a zero waste approach to extraction. Really quickly going over this, like I said, water holding capacity, nutrient, organic matter, soil carbon, these are all buzzwords that you hear when you talk about agricultural space, and these are all the things that our current product stream can improve on. I know people like pictures, so this is some initial results that we've had from the lab. I think most people can see the photos sort of on the right hand side look a little bit healthier than the photos on the left hand side, so 0% seaweed added to the soils versus up to 8%. but that also increases your germination rate. So the trends to date have shown, like I said, increased water holding capacity, increased germination rate, increased health, and everything weird and wonderful in terms of soils. So I don't annoy Rachel too much. Our plans for 2026, we're going to hopefully do some cultivation trials up north across sort of like Broome, that Kununurra, Darwin and Gove region, pending regulatory approvals. And that's dig at you, Hayley and Bryn, when that comes through. Site-specific soil trials. So again, where those regional locations are, partnerships. So if any of you know some soil trial people up there who want me to do some work in the lab, gathering a few buckets of that. Optimizing pigment and hydrocolloid extraction, so the weird and wonderful way of separation, which I could again talk about for hours. Kicking off our international partnerships, again, because we know this is an existing industry over in places like Indonesia, trying to get some trials done, hopefully deploying some of our marine biologists over there to learn from them, but also help them understand the front end, things like sporophore release and alike. Seed bank development with industry. So I think Justin mentioned that as well in terms of a gap in the market at the moment. So yeah, working towards that. And then also starting our training development pilot programs, because I think we all know having a trained workforce doesn't happen overnight and you have to start it pretty early. So that's my spiel. And if you have any input, if you want to be involved in any of these programs, feel free to reach out. All my contact deals up. And I think I went the shortest, but still over time, Rachel. So hopefully you don't get too mad.
No, I'm definitely not getting mad. I think we just have made a note that we need longer for next time. Lots of great content. So thanks, Alison. I will keep us moving along as the management branch start to share their slides. But as Alison said, please reach out to what she's doing. Alison has been part of Aqua's Aquaculture for the Future program, which really celebrated industry connections and bringing peers from across the state together, definitely across species and cross locations. So really nice to see you here. Thanks again, Alison.